Good morning, everybody. Thank you. So my name is Jeremy Keiffer. Before we get to introductions for Dr. Miller and myself, a couple housekeeping acknowledgments. After our presentation, something to look forward to is lunch. We will have a brief 15-minute break at 11:45 for us to transition to the room right over here. That's where we're going to have our luncheon and awards. For those of you attending online, if you want to participate in the live chat, scroll down and you'll see a button that says live chat and open side panel. Go ahead and click that and you can access the chat. In order for you to get credit for this presentation, because I cannot see you online, please make sure you sign in, writing your name in there so you can get your CEUs. Now, that being said, again, good morning. Great, that's the most interaction I'm probably gonna get. My name is Jeremy Keiffer. I am a certified social worker and a master's of social work. I am a board member with the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling, director of community health evaluations with River Valley Behavioral Health, an adjunct professor with Brescia University for their master's of social work program, and proudly a mental health consultant with Project Ricochet, who we will have two wonderful presenters later this afternoon for. Today, what we are going to be talking about is how we can look at beyond the concept of problem gambling and the issues of definitional ambiguity with how that relates. And I'll let Dr. Miller go ahead and introduce himself and start from there.
Hello, my name is Dr. Miller. I'm actually coming from the University of Indianapolis, where I direct our Masters of Social Work program. Jeremy and I have been friends for a long time, since college. We both went to Kentucky Wesleyan together. I grew up in a small town called Barville, which I had to kind of relearn to call Barberville when I left, right? So, but you got to put the gravel in your mouth, say Barville. So I grew up in the Appalachian side of the state. Actually lived in multiple places, lived in around Covington area for a little while as well. I am just tremendously happy to be here, to be with friends, to be with colleagues, and to talk about my home state. I have my doctorate in social work, where I studied very specifically social epidemiology, just a very fancy way of saying trying to understand the breadth and depth of how certain diseases spread from a perspective that you and I care about, from a social aspect. And so Jeremy and I, we spent the last several months studying gambling from that perspective. And so what we are trying to do today is ultimately go through and start with the very core concepts of what is gambling disorder, how do we diagnose it, how do we find it, how do we understand this from a clinical perspective. But then we're going to start moving into a broader space where we're looking at what are the demographics. And then this is when we're going to start putting on our social scientists' hats today, right? We're going to be looking at what are the risk factors, what are the protective factors, what are the social structures that we navigate, and how the problem of gambling exists, right? So then we'll move into a very clear public health framing, and then we'll talk about what does this look like within the U.S. and in Kentucky. And then we're not going to leave you high and dry with just the theoretical frameworks and the conceptual mapping, which we'll spend a considerable amount of time doing, but we'll actually start to get down to what does that mean for prevention, intervention, what do we need to do in terms of policy, how do we need to engineer our clinical work and our practical work. So we're going to be going from the very top of the funnel to the very bottom of the funnel. So I know sometimes there's many thinkers that like to start with the very concrete, and we're going to try to do both, right? We're going to be shifting from the very concrete to the very abstract. We're going to be weaving these concepts together in a way that creates a holistic way that we can understand this problem.
And speaking of the problem, in order for that to be effective, we actually need to start with a definition. And that's where one of the problems we first encounter with gambling use disorders comes up, because we don't have a very good set definition. If we look at a gambling disorder versus a pathological gambler, those are not necessarily the same thing according to clinical studies. For the DSM-5, they define that as a persistent and recurrent problematic gambling behavior leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. ICD-11 categorizes it also as an addictive behavior, right? But it is also pathological. When we're looking at the concept, there is that compulsion. So the continuous inability of an individual to abstain from gambling activities despite those adverse consequences. So what the literature uses when they're talking about a pathological gambler creates this overarching term to describe this as a problem, right? Now we run into the issue. The diagnosis versus the clinical reality. DSM-5 looks at least 4 of these 9 criteria within 12 months, right? But we also have to consider these co-occurring patterns of problematic behavior to properly anticipate it. We have to see these problems with gambling as well as that co-occurrence with mood and anxiety. In many cases, individuals are engaging in this behavior as a way to manage mood issues or anxiety, right? We get that dopamine rush. Then we see a co-occurrence with substance use. Individuals that are engaging in alcohol use or smoking or marijuana use or cocaine, other stimulants, are far more likely to develop even stronger pathways to that problem gambling behavior. The clinical takeaway here is that we need to screen in multiple ways. It's not enough to just look at problem gambling by itself. We need to be screening everybody. Co-occurring mental health and substance use issues are very common, and they also increase that risk of suicidality. Was this? Okay, this is you now.
Yep. So when we are looking at who are typically diagnosed through this pathway for problem gambling and for a gambling diagnosis, we see certain patterns start to arise from that. And we break these down into kind of 3 broad categories of how we understand the prevalence of this. We look at the age and gender. We look at how the products, what products there are, how do we access this behavior, and then what is the clinical and social vulnerability, right? So we have these 3 buckets in how we understand the prevalence. And as this audience probably knows at this point, it really targets young adults and particularly young men. And this is in part because of, if we look at who is engaging in high-risk behaviors across the board, it is typically young adults who have not yet developed their full functioning brain by the age of 25 or 27. But it is the individuals who have a hard time assessing how will I be harmed by engaging in this behavior.
Right.
And this tends to be true kind of all across all spaces of where we assess for risk, right? Men and young men in particular seem to be vulnerable when there's risky behaviors. And it's a funny story in public health. That's one of the real statistical reasons why men do not live as long as women, right? Because we tend to do dangerous things, and women are on average much more reserved in that. For the product access, so it's really important is that if you cannot access gambling and cannot engage in that behavior, you cannot get that diagnosis, right? So there does have to be an environmental infrastructure in how you access gambling. So for us, it really comes down to the usual suspects of casinos, horse racing, the lottery, and then the emergence of sports betting, poly markets, predictive markets, right? We're seeing an explosive growth of access. It's amazing to me the number of billboards that I've seen about betting just within the last year, right? So one thing that I want to really emphasize here as we're sitting on the environment and the platform in which betting exists, it seems to be taking a more economical space within our society, right? It is becoming a structural component of how we exist, So the salience of this group of people will be much more important in the future years. So I expect to see that this group will probably grow in that. As we look at the clinical and social vulnerability, we see the things that there are co-occurring diagnoses, such as mood, anxiety, a history of trauma. Unsurprisingly, impulsivity is a core component for being a risk factor for being prone to gambling. All right, that impulsivity makes it difficult to assess the risks. And gambling triggers the same aspects within the body, within the brain, as other addictive behaviors, right? And we're in a point in our social world where the products that we receive understand the triggers of those addictions. We are being behaviorally conditioned to behave in a certain way, such as betting, that gets reinforced so that we repeat it, right? So it is happening physiologically inside of us, and it is happening within our social environment, right? So one of the things that we'll see is as we start getting to a closer definition of how do we understand gambling, we will be moving beyond just the individual responsibility for it. Here are just some other demographic pieces. It kind of matches what we've already have stated. A little less than 50% of adults engage in some type of gambling. A little less than 20% are adolescents, and then about 10% of adolescents are doing that gambling online, right? We're seeing that the infrastructure of gambling is changing. We see that as predominantly men, making up about half. Women is still considerable at 37%, but still marginally lower than men. Right, so we can sense that the demographic here is pretty clear kind of across the board at a national level and the state level.
Now, when we consider other risk factors, a big one is the same kind of factor that is also a productive factor when used appropriately, and that is academics. Education is a gateway. It is the greatest thing that can level the playing field regardless of the class you're in, right? It is a key out of poverty for people. So what we see is academic performance, low school performance, has been very strongly linked to higher rates of problem gambling. Because, as Angela pointed out, our culture, our population in the United States, one of the big things that we have as a concept that runs through all of us is hope. The hope that we can do better. The hope our parents have that we can rise above. The hope that we can create a name and a place for ourselves. Predatory groups like gambling, payday lenders, stuff like that, prey on that concept of hope, particularly for those that fall in between these cracks of lower academic performance. So I want you all to keep that in mind. One of the things I really appreciated when you were discussing these circles is that when we talk about circles, we're not talking about boxes. A circle is something you can step outside of and move to a new one. A box is something you keep inside and you are held in. So that transition of moving from a circle away from those boxes is deeply important here. And education is one of the best ways to do that. The other risk factor that we see that's very common is impulsivity. As Dr. Miller pointed out, this is a significant predictor of problem gambling and is often associated with those individuals that are sensory seeking or have those co-occurring diagnoses of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So let's think about scope of harm now. Again, we're putting on these social scientist hats. How many of you here, show of hands, are familiar with the Rose hypothesis? It's okay, I wasn't either till this. And we'll go more into detail, but the Rose hypothesis is this concept in prevention that leads to kind of a prevention paradox. And that is a large number of people at low risk often generate more cases of harm than those at higher risk. But that paradox is, as we are developing prevention tactics, the higher risk people are the ones that get the higher grade of attention. So we're leaving this entire group of people that are at a low risk but are generating those greater number of cases, we are leaving them in the margins for this group that is at the smaller rate. We pay more attention to the rose than we do all the flowers around it. On top of that, the ICD-11 does recognize that hazardous gambling is this pattern that, again, as Angela pointed out, appreciably increases that risk of harmful physical or mental health consequences, because what are we sacrificing when we gamble? For those of us that live in poverty, it is very expensive to do, right? When you live in poverty, the thing you are borrowing against is your own future. I can't afford the doctor. I'm going to get sick later. Now I'm out of work. I can't afford the dentist. So later I have more cascading issues. I break my toe. I walk on it because I can't afford to not miss work. I can't afford to get married, or my partner loses her Medicaid benefits. So again, when we consider the scope of harm, it's important to not just focus on the problem gambler or the definition we are currently using at a clinical level, but recognizing the social and societal community level harms.
Yeah. One of the ways that I like to think about what Jeremy's talking about here is the breadth and depth of this problem, right? We need to look at it in terms of who are we capturing when we look at the data, right? If we're looking at only problem gamblers, we are missing 90% of the other population that are engaging in gambling behaviors. When we look at who is harmed and we say it's only that individual that is harmed because it's their bank account, we're not looking at who is around this person. We are not looking at their children, their partner, their parents that they may support. It is also important to look at community wealth as a whole, right? When one person in a community prospers, other individuals within that community benefit from it, and it becomes a counter-layering component as people start to rise together. And so when one person falls, it creates risk, not only for that individual, not only for their interpersonal relationships in their family, but also as the community as a whole. And so we have to look at very specifically who all is impacted by this. So when we define it as problem gambling or a gambling diagnosis, we are missing about 90% of the suffering that comes from this type of behavior. And this slide really goes farther into that, right? And we also have a greater depth of how we can start to identify those harms. You know, above the fray, right, we're talking about a diagnosis of gambling disorder, right? It's like, oh, it's just a mental illness. No, there are subdomains that are affected beyond that. That is the depth of how we need to understand the suffering that occurs. And we are looking at, it affects the financial components. It affects the relationships. It affects the mental health. It affects workplace and school, right? And it affects other family members, right? Can you imagine the amount of stress hormones that are being pumped through someone that is experiencing these types of everyday behaviors? Right. We know that stress just starts to degrade the body, our capacities, and it takes intentional repair after that. And so one of the things about gambling is that you have to repair multiple domains within a person and their family system and their community system, right? Recovering, reclaiming financial space and autonomy, reclaiming relationships that may be severed because of the problem gambling and the suffering that you inflicted on your spouse or your partner because of the losses. You know, reclaiming your own mental health and self-determination, right? These are all spaces of reclamation that have to occur as we go into a recovery of gambling issues and gambling behavior. So when I talk about there's a breadth and then there's a depth of how we understand this. And when we focus on, I'm going to say this many times because it's the thesis of our presentation. So, you know, when we only focus on problem gambling and a diagnosis, we miss the marker on many axes, right?
Yeah. And this kind of helps obscure this true scale. Again, when we looked at the previous picture, this helps better ideate it as a iceberg, right? The diagnosed pathological gambler only makes about 1 to 4% of adults in a given population. Those at-risk gamblers, those affected, is what we don't see. Based on research, one person's gambling problem typically affects up to 10 people. Those 10 people also have connections that are also affected. This is a cascading issue. When we talk about gambling, particularly the harms that we see within our community, what we're also seeing is not just a concentration of wealth and funding that you would typically see in a properly functioning community. What we are seeing is robbery by scale, a transference and a removal of wealth from communities that could use it to prosper. How many of you hit a pothole on your way in here today? Do you think those would be there if wealth was still in this community? I hope not. Problem gambling is not a simple binary 1 or 2 condition. It exists on this continuum that goes from recreational, the person that might just stop by the casino or pick up a lotto ticket or a pull tab because it's Friday and I've got the extra cash, all the way to the at-risk and the severe. That is how the DSM has started to view just about any mental health diagnosis across the spectrum. We recognize it's not an either-or. Focusing only on diagnosed pathological gamblers systematically underestimates how much harm is being done to our societies, our systems, and our communities. And those significant harms even occur among those that are classified as non-problem gamblers because the way groups work, right? Groups always skew towards whoever is the greatest risk taker, right? Keith was talking with his wife this last night about a very funny story from when we were in college together. We were playing hide and go seek, and I was the more wild one in the group, and I hid up in the roof, and while the RA was yelling at us, I fell down through it. No one else decided to climb up into the roof, but the next time we played, a lot of people did.
And we shouldn't have.
And we shouldn't have, right? Thank you. Good cover. In any given group, the group starts to merge and veer towards the greatest risk-taking person in that group. And that's where we start to see problematic behaviors of gambling start to occur, even if only one person would hit that clinical quality, because they influence everyone else.
May I say one thing real quick, if you don't mind going back to the previous slide? I think on a final note of this, I think you guys really understand the point of what we're saying, but I want to push us just a little bit farther. I only have you for a little bit of time, so I want to push you a little bit. We very intentionally chose the word obscures, right? Because the act of focusing so narrow is an intentional choice. And a part of this group, if we want to take it seriously, is that we have to intentionally widen the scope of those definitions. A narrow scope protects a small body of people that are gaining wealth from these types of policies. And this also restricts the science and our knowledge and our understanding. It's preventing the flashlight from being shined fully into the cave, right? So we have to open the hole because of that narrow keyhole that we're looking through is intentionally small, right? And so there will be conflict that we'll have to engage in to make sure that we can understand at a much broader level.
Thank you, Keith. So now let's think about those public health impacts, right? And the way we're going to approach this is from 3 core theoretical components and frameworks. First is the socio-ecological model. And what this looks at are 4 co-occurring spheres that we see when public health has an impact. We have interpersonal, which are those biopsychological traits we all have. Age, gender identity, racial and ethnic identity or origin, even our own personality traits are all interpersonal. But no one exists in a vacuum, right? So we have a second sphere, the intrapersonal. These are our immediate surroundings. Who are our people, our social supports? What are our values of conformity and normalization within a culture, which then brings us to our next sphere, which is organizational and community. What is available within your community? What are the resources that your community can draw upon? This is also where we start to see online gaming and gambling occur, as well as marketing towards it. And I'm going to be making a very intentional choice throughout this presentation where I am not going to just say gambling, it is also gaming. Because we are starting to see this skew younger and younger, and that is by design. It is a feature, not a bug. Gambling operators and gambling organizations, the marketing they are doing is skewing younger and younger because they are applying gaming elements. And video games themselves are borrowing from gambling organizations and routines and methods to get people hooked on their video games, which all that does is prime that young person to just make a lateral transfer right into it.
Has anybody else, I'm a parent of 2 young daughters, has anybody else banned Roblox from their children? Yes, good, very wise choice.
Speaking of banning, that leads us to our fourth sphere, social and policy. The cultural values within our family. What do we value when we make rules within a family unit? But also, how do legal regulations occur? And one of the things you will see as we get to the last part of our presentation is this hesitance by our elected officials to properly address gambling and gaming as a regulation, and trying to, again, obscure what is defined. So, the next one we look at, and I touched on this earlier, is that prevention paradox, the Rose hypothesis. This society's population harm is mainly caused by low-risk groups rather than those that are clinically diagnosed. So we are seeing literally the trees for the forest. We are only paying attention to this one tree that's right in front of us because that's what is immediately present, but we're ignoring everything around it. Because if we pay attention to it, it means we have to do something. The commercial determinants of health. This is looking at it as the same lens that we would see tobacco or alcohol, their corporate playbooks occur. And we are already seeing this with the recent hearings for social media companies. And we will talk about AI and algorithms as well, so buckle up. Shaping evidence-based through industry-funded research, which means that the research has a vested interest in the industry surviving. Right? If I am being paid to say everything is fine, then guess what's okay? Everything that's happening. But this is where we start to see these domains of impact.
I hope that you guys have come to appreciate the number of metaphors. We have not yet mixed them. We have used them all properly, but we have used at least 3 or 4 different metaphors.
That's what they're for.
Yeah, which I think have actually been really good. I didn't expect the tree for the forest. I will steal that.
By all means.
Yeah. So this comes out directly from the public health literature from the Lancet and from Latvala et al. Right. So this is how the most contemporary literature that we could find starts to understand the domains of impact and the levels of impact for gambling. And we're going to dive a bit more deeply into each of these different categories, not necessarily on this slide. So treat this slide as an overview of the process, right? And so we typically talk about the negative impacts, the risks, the costs of a certain behavior, and then we also counter that with the positive impacts and the benefits. This is a very common kind of framing within public health. It most simply translates into like the risk and protective factors. So it's an expansion of that framework. And these researchers identified kind of 3 domains that seem to be most impacted throughout. They did a meta-analysis, which is like the highest level of evidence in the scientific community. And so they identified across the literature these domains, the financial impacts, the labor impacts, and the health and well-being impacts. And they also acknowledged that focusing on the individual is not enough, right? So they identified 3 levels: the personal, the interpersonal. In social work, we call this the meso, but I really like the language of interpersonal, right? Because it is about the relationships that we have with one another, because that feels tangibly real to us. And then how does that affect our communities, our neighborhoods, and then our broader society, right? So they tier it out that way.
So let's first start with personal. If we're looking at financial impacts, 83% of people experience financial problems related to gambling. That is that we know of. I'd say that's probably higher, wouldn't you? Yeah, because again, we're only looking at one. We don't exist in a vacuum. Labor impacts, we see a negative impact on productivity. If I'm worried about where my money's coming from or where I'm going to find it, I'm not paying attention to the work I'm doing. I'm being more likely to call in sick because my stress levels are so high that my immune system suffers. The working relationships we have suffer because my productivity, my performance starts to do poorly, which means my team at work can't count on me at the same level of quality that I was trying to do before. And then speaking of those health and well-being impacts, you lose your job, where's your health insurance? Our health insurance is tied to our employment. You can't afford not to work. We start to see a decrease in health. People start to, again, think of that poverty mindset. We sacrifice our future for the now. We're less likely to see a doctor. And exercise starts to suffer as problem gambling increases. Have you ever seen someone try to do slot machines on a treadmill? No, it is a sedentary activity, right? Now let's start to think of those interpersonal, those connections we see. Our concerned significant others, 60% on average have someone that is negatively impacted if there's someone with a diagnosed problem gambling issue. Are they getting attention paid to them? Probably not. The family functioning starts to suffer because that individual is leveraging their relationships to make ends meet. And because of that, we start to see a shame for that individual that is diagnosed. And shame only teaches us to not get caught. It's not regret. Regret teaches me to want to make amends and to try to better things. But what we feel is shame. Because I don't want to get caught, I hide. I can't trust you. My family can't trust you. Your friends can't trust you. And because of that lack of trust, we're more likely to see increases in conflict and because of those risks of conflict, conflict itself is a self-feeding cycle of behavioral involvement and escalation, which is where we start to see intimate partner violence and domestic abuse. And then we see our legacies, our families and our generations is long lasting. We all have that story of that grandparent that's off their rocker, right? Or we can't remember, we don't talk to that uncle or that aunt because they stole all that money. The effects on the children in those households, because like Angela said, our country does not have a Bill of Rights for women and children, unlike many other countries across the world. The United States ain't one of them. A child has no rights. So let's think about societal. Was this one you?
Either way.
Okay, I got it. Because you're going up next anyways. Now let's think about society. Harm is not equal. It's not. We like to think of harm as harm, right? But it's across a gradient. In some places, we see disadvantaged populations being impacted far more. And because of those impacts, it only reinforces those societal and structural inequalities. Our structures, our society, our policies, our laws, and our regulations are not built with everyone in this room in mind. When those laws were made, a lot of you didn't look like the people that made them. Well, because of that, we start to see a disproportionate impact on minorities and people within the margins. They see quicker adverse consequences due to those systemic disparities, and that loss in net worth, that removal, that robbery of wealth from communities impacts them harder, which leads to worsening high environmental exposure. Populations in high deprivation areas often have higher densities of gambling venues. Again, that predation of hope, creating an overlap of geographical exposure and socio-demographic abuse. Think in your communities, where are the landfills? Are they in the nice neighborhoods? Where are the paper mills? Are they in the nice communities? Where's the electric plant? Is it in the nice communities? They can afford to not have them there because of policies that were written without them at the table. We cannot have a community without unity. We cannot have laws that are passed at a table that not everyone has a seat at.
Will you slide us back up to the matrix? So
He let me have the clicker. That's on him.
There are some benefits to gambling. They are small, but let's make sure that we take the time to identify those. So this is what has been, again, comes out of the meta-analysis of the literature across the board. And so this is an attempt to be comprehensive, and the list is still pretty small. I know the text is small here, but some of the benefits are for when you win, that's pretty good for you, right? You have the financial boon of that. You can also leverage that in an interpersonal way. You can share your winnings. You can give back to other individuals. That also, depending on, you can also create other jobs when you gain that wealth. You can also engage this in an entertainment side, right? You can bond and socialize and do the entertainment with individuals as you are engaging in these behaviors. The other piece is, if structured correctly, there is tax revenue and economic growth, right? If it is a part of a plan for tourism, if it is a part of a plan of giving substantially back to the local city, to the local state, it can be a part of that infrastructure that does have positive benefits. And this can be a part of job creation and tourism, right? So we have seen components of those. To me personally, when reading through the literature, that list in our current state seems to be fairly inadequate. I don't think that we're engaging quite in the right policies that make the most benefit of these things. And we're seeing the harm being laid at those that are most vulnerable. That is consistent across the board, right? Is that when there are benefits, it's at the cost of the marginalized, vulnerable, and those that aren't at the table to make the policies, right? So again, this is a person in environment situation where they are interplaying with one another. And a part of that interplay is what compounds upon and builds inequities, right? And there's strategies that build into those inequities. We have targeted marketing, normalization in some communities, right? You see the billboards, you see the geofencing ads, right? Is that specific spaces? I can only imagine the colleges that are geofenced for these types of betting. So there's also a difference in neighborhood access. A lot of times it's about proximity. Do you do the lottery at the gas station? Do you have to go to the casino? Right, mobile phones become an issue here in terms of immediate access, right? Or little addiction machines that we have in our pockets. I am suspect to that. I am addicted to YouTube. I scroll. There's also economic strain where in these vulnerable spaces, the harms accumulate a lot faster, right? I talked to you about the scaffolding of as one family raises and another family raises, that community reinforces itself. Well, when those barriers are weak, when one person experiences that financial strain, it tugs harshly on the others, right? And so the weaker those are, the more likely it is to collapse. Barriers to care. Sometimes there's stigma around the language. What we often see, especially in the payday lending spaces, and I imagine that it's similar here with gambling, is that there is a stigma about admitting how much debt you're in. How much do you owe back? But with payday lending, it targets a very specific community, right? There are literal maps of, oh, yeah, we're going to do these types of credit cards here by banking institutions, or we're going to put a payday lending institution in this community. And the debt can be mapped geographically, right? Your zip code can predict your debt. More research needs to be done, but the strategies are the same. So I imagine that if we investigate it, the data will be the same. So if anyone wants to do that study, let me know. Let's go. Let's figure it out. And then as we do get into the clinical spaces where we're teaching skills, where we're doing the therapies, sometimes there's just cultural mismatches. I think that this group is one of the more culturally competent groups, just talking with you all, listening to you all speak. I think that that's one of the strengths that Kentucky has, is that it's culturally homogenous in a lot of ways, and the value systems is very clear and explicit. That's not true across all different states. I operate in Indianapolis, and there are many, many different cultures. And that's true for Kentucky, too. There's multiple cultures in some of our larger metropolitan spaces where we need to shift our thinking and how we approach those skill trainings and how we talk about those. But at a state level, there is a homogeneity that occurs. Yeah.
We get it. We take care of our neighbors here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would argue, I'm personally much more of a fan, and I think this is a credit to our fields, that cultural competence, I think, isn't enough. An effort towards cultural humility is far more important. Because when we look at competency, in many cases, when we hear that word, and I'm a big fan of words, I'm paid to talk. I'm a big fan of words, which means to me, when I hear competency, I think of a certificate, right? I am competent in this culture. That's not correct. I have no idea what it is like to be any one of you. What is more effective is emotions and feelings. Those are universal. I have no idea what it's like to be a woman. I have no idea what it's like to be middle class. I grew up in poverty. But what I do know is despair and depression and sadness, anxiety, stress, wondering where the next bill is going to be paid for and where those risk and protective factors come into play. High socioeconomic status is a very effective protective measure of gambling. Gambling disorder is a class-based one. If I lose $100 and I make $1 million a year, okay? If I lose $100 and I don't have a job, low socioeconomic status and living in poverty serve as a risk factor for someone developing a gambling disorder. Again, it comes back to hope and optimism. We are a deeply optimistic culture, despite how sometimes people like to present themselves as cynical. We want to believe the best. That is why we're in this field. We are driven by hope that we can make a difference and make an impact. And in some ways, that can be perverted into a way to take advantage and harm those that we are trying to heal. So be very careful with that. Another piece, and Dr. Miller touched on this, is parental supervision. Your kids can go on Roblox?
No, absolutely.
It is a key protective factor to help prevent adolescents from gambling, because there is that supervision. Those who do not receive as much supervision are more likely to develop gambling issues because there's not someone there to curb it. One of the number one protective factors across the board is the presence of at least one non-parent adult that takes a genuine interest in you. Community centers saved my life growing up. And it was because of those types of mentors that taught me that that I had a circle I could transition out of, and I wasn't in a box.
Is this all me?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So I think we've done a really good job of starting to conceptualize this ecological model, right? Again, it's awfully tiny when we need to like double the length of our presentation, I think.
Y'all got time. We'll skip lunch.
But here we really are talking about when we talk about who gets to sit at the table to make certain legislations, who gets to sit at the table to make certain policies. These things happen at a macro level. These happen at the larger layers of our society. And these drive these social determinants of health or these industry determinants of health that affect those that are engaging in the problem gambling and gambling behaviors. And so I want to really reinforce that there is a platform in which gambling sits upon, right? It is easy for us to have this conversation about personal responsibility, that it is your job as an individual to refrain from this activity. Yes, absolutely, right? There is individual accountability. We also need to create fair systems that allow people to escape those platforms when they ask and when they reach out for help, right?
Mm-hmm. We need to have these friction pieces.
Yeah. And so I want to go back a little bit to the language of when we were talking about how the problem is obscured, right? And that it is intentionally obscured in many ways, definitely at the legislative level, the diagnostic level, and the science level. And so these policies are written intentionally we can just ask ourselves, who benefits, right? With any policy we say, who benefits from this the most and who loses? And ultimately, when we look at these behaviors and we look at them at scale and we look at them in terms of the social reality, it is wealth being extracted from a specific community, right? It is an extraction of wealth. Mm-hmm. So I'm moving into that language very deliberately because there is an intentionality to it. Whether it's whoever wrote the policy doesn't care, maybe it's an unintended consequence, but we do, right? We care because we are a part of those consequences. And so those practices, those partnerships, you see them happen at the industry level. And so there needs to be greater conversation in those spaces where we shape the platform, we shape the points of access, and we shape what does that mean in terms of revenue, taxation, and regulation. And this is not only a platform issue, right? Not only shaping the environment, but in practice, when we're working with individuals, we know that these behaviors occur in the body, right? We've talked just a little bit about it triggers the same addictive pathways as tobacco, as alcohol use, right? And so there are physical changes that occur. So when we are engaging in practice, we are to expect that there will be harm to others, that there will be community costs, that there will be debt, violences, more child welfare engagement, right? There are prices being paid in other sectors for the lack of regulation, right? So there are other industries that can be allies in this conversation, right? Many of us in here, we're working with families, and that is a wonderful place to be. And we also need to share those stories at multiple levels. We need to share those stories at the community to reduce the stigma. And we need to share those stories at the state level to have better regulation, right? There's a few other points, but I think that's the salient thread here. There's some scientific stuff, right? I've talked about if you can measure things accurately, you just get better knowledge, and you get to take that with you. So that's really important to me. But so again, if anybody wants to do research together on this, I'm totally down.
So I actually just realized while we were going through this, that's actually a copy of the same slide from earlier, so we're going to skip right past that. What you'll notice through much of this presentation is, despite the fact that both of us have backgrounds in social epidemiology and community health, we're not throwing a bunch of numbers at you, and that's by design. I've noticed and we've learned that as we throw numbers, people's eyes kind of glaze over because we all hated math class, right? Abini's having a great time. But we're actually going to start to throw some numbers now. And that's going to start with... Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to single y'all out. You two we'll check later. Digitization is changing how we are being exposed, the intensity, and, like Keith said, who is getting harmed. So we're going to use an example because we're in Kentucky. We're going to talk about sports wagering. Hooray. This started in September 7th of 2023 and went online about 3 weeks later. In the first year, $2.39 billion was made. 87 million was in retail. The rest of that was online. In 2025, that was 2.8 billion. It's just going up. You want to know where it's at now? Between just January to now of this year, $1.9 billion in Kentucky. We are on pace to continue going past this. The thing that we're seeing that is expanding even quicker is mobile sports betting. Like Keith said, and I'm going to steal this one from you, our little our pocket addiction device. Mobile sports betting, those micro in-play markets, the continuous online casino-style products, where legal, and really you can use a VPN and just right past that. And that convergence with gaming and financial style products, loot boxes, microtransactions. If you are playing something for free, that is because you are the product. Let's talk about casinos in our pocket, our mobile device, right? Our cell phone gives us widespread accessibility. Like we talked about with Angela, cell phones, the ability to have a cell phone at this point is a basic necessity for life. Can you apply for a job without a cell phone? Can you look for one? Can you apply? No. Most things are online now. Phones are everywhere. And in many cases, they do have the capacity, depending on what device you have or what app you have, to be paying attention to your conversations. If you look at those app permissions when you set them up, if you gave it microphone permissions, guess what it's listening to? How many of you have turned around and talked with your friend and then later that day a Google search popped up of a targeted ad based on something similar to what you had? Keith, how much about gambling did you know about prior to us working together?
Oh, not a lot.
How many ads do you now get?
Oh, tons.
This kind of goes back to that piece, right? Online gambling is one of the fastest growing sectors within the industry, but losses are in the billions for consumers. Again, you'll hear people and politicians talk about how our economics are strong. I don't have my money invested in the Dow, right? I barely have it in my bank account. What we are seeing, the things that are being harmed, are not the people that are getting the chance to make the decisions. There is a presence that it transcends borders. Technology is fantastic, just like education, at erasing boundaries for people, and again, creating circles for us to transition seamlessly in. It's also an effective way for that predation to surpass and hop and break containment. We see penetrated regions where the activity is legally prohibited or regulatory infrastructure is weak. Again, we are starting to see this on a massive scale, a transference of wealth. And part of that is, again, by design. This is a feature, it is not a bug. Products are designed for faster, more intense, and blurred forms of gambling. Before with a slot machine, and I apologize if this creates a tender reaction for those of my participants that are in recovery, but you still had to do this. I just have to tap a button. I have my account linked to my card. I am not thinking. I am not having that friction stopping me from engaging. It's maximizing my engagement and minimizing my time of thinking. The in-play betting, the technology allows for real-time wagering, and that changes gambling from a single event to a constant series of games. We are constantly jumping. And again, for those of us that have those sensory issues, those with ADHD, that ability to quickly jump from game to game to game to game happens. And for those individuals that have issues with video game or online game addiction, we see that immediate need for constant salience occurring. And this just makes it again, lateral transfer. Digitization of traditional products, of what we traditionally pictured when we thought of gambling, is changing. We are actually, despite the fact that, as Angela pointed out, there was this huge discrepancy between lottery and historical horse racing, that is starting to skew further and further away in favor of online gaming. I don't have to go anywhere. And it especially exploded during the pandemic with the lockdown. All I had to do, I had my phone. I couldn't see my friends, but I could do this. There are quick and intense games that can be played on your phone. And again, going back to the algorithm, and this is where we're going to talk about AI, if a game is free, it's because you are the product. If you are using a social media platform and it is free, you don't have to pay a subscription for it, it is because you are the product for it. It is tracking everything you do. When we talk about AI, we get tripped up on that idea of intelligence and view it as something like a guru or something that understands what's going on, and that's not what it is. It is informed by those very same algorithms we see on social media. It is informed based on what people search for, what people do, which also creates a bias based on the marginalized who suffer and get excluded. And for agencies and corporations and operators that focus on AI as the transition for decision making, those people in the margins are getting more and more obscured and lost. We start to see marketing channels change because of that social media, the use of online influencers. When Keith, and he did this very purposely, announced and shared his background as someone who grew up in poverty, when Angela shared her background, what that did is also create a sense of understanding and kind of a sense of, I get where you're at, authority. Influencers use that too. By having this sense of relatability and being part of a culture, even if it's online, that creates a system of trust that some influencers can absolutely use to their advantage. They present gambling as a high reward lifestyle, and they ignore the negative impacts. They hide those, and again, they obscure them. And in many cases, for those that play online or stream online, they also encourage the use of channel points to wager on what they are doing, which now creates a feedback loop of me wagering on what you're about to wager, which is going to lead me to wager on what you're about to wager, and going on, and you don't even realize you're doing it because it's entertainment. The cross-selling, the recruitment, companies using consumer databases such as those on social media platforms to potentially target new consumers. Again, that geofencing that we see, that targeting of specific zip codes to make sure that we are able to prey on your hope and your optimism. This tends to trigger direct marketing for new products as they become legal, and this is where we start to see new regulatory challenges in this digital age. So this is where we're also going to start talking about prediction markets. Again, hooray. Is a prediction market gambling?
Yes.
Not according to the federal regulation. It is considered investment. Yeah. And this is actually shows just how far behind we already are, because I had to update and make notes about this earlier today, because as of March 12th, the FTC opened and published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking allowing for public comment on the need to amend or issue new regulations concerning event contracts, which is what they called trading on prediction markets. The FTC currently regulates as the jurisdiction at a federal level for prediction markets. They currently argue that this is a federal thing and not a state oversight like we would normally see with state gambling regulations. They treat it as an investment or trading, just like you would the stock market. If state gaming jurisdiction is able to be allowed to regulate this, this would then be clarified as betting and gambling that we are well aware it is, since state gaming authorities are what typically regulate sports betting, and similar with this objective of being able to tax and regulate those funds. I'm going to throw a couple other numbers. How many of you are familiar with Polymarket or Kalshi? Couple hands. Those are the primary prediction markets we see online right now. They're free for you to make an account. Nicolas Maduro, who's familiar with that name? That was the Venezuelan president who was recently removed from power. An individual on Polymarket made $400,000 by creating a bet that he would be removed within 30 days of them coming in. Another group of users on Kalshi made $15 million betting on Elon Musk's Twitter usage. Another person made $1.2 million based on the Middle East conflicts in Iran. Is that betting or is that an investment? There's that too. These are the things that we are competing against when we are looking at these things. And I can feel some of the concern, and I am too. But when we position wagering in the same way as when we were kids saying, I bet you can't, we are creating a new and normalized idea of betting on every single thing that we breathe. And that's where policy and intervention strategies come into play. And speaking of by design, the reason why we are co-presenting is so y'all can take a breath when I'm done talking so I can drink some water. Go ahead.
All right, wonderful. At this point, we have established this frame that we've been using back and forth. The interesting thing about this presentation is that it is more of a weaving of concepts. A lot of times we receive these and the content gets chunked into blocks and then kind of divorced from each other. So if you feel like we're going back and forth,
that's by design.
It may be inelegant and maybe we'll get better over time, but there is a reason that we're weaving these concepts back and forth. And so moving into thinking about this, we are thinking about systems. We are thinking about what are the risk factors and what are the protective factors, right? This is just the traditional critical thinking skill set that we use when understanding a social problem. And we've alluded to a lot of these. The risk factors is that the shape of gambling is changing, right? The mobile access, the high velocity products, I think that's such a wonderful phrase, in the ways in which you engage in betting that can happen quickly, effortlessly, and in a way that is always accessible, right? Is that there's very little friction that can stop you from, if you are in a cycle of betting, right? And there's ways that we can address this, right? We can say that you're only allowed to make bets every so often at certain amounts. We can do certain age restrictions, right? Right. There are ways that we can change that friction in terms of policy. And especially if we're targeting those that have impulsivity, that are being triggered through an addiction cycle that we know that is happening physiologically, it's probably an ethical mandate that we create these frictions, right? Otherwise, it's predatory. We're saying, you can't control this behavior and we are going to profit from it exponentially. We have the 24-hour access. It also triggers individuals that have stress, trauma, adverse childhood experiences, because betting responsibly requires a lot of regulation, or choosing not to bet requires a lot of emotional and physiological regulation, right? And this occurs in the body by developing that prefrontal cortex, by having caregivers that teach us how to regulate our emotions, that have mentors in our lives that teach us to slow down and make decisions. These things that can be taught in schools, right? Social emotional learning is a key preventative tactic that we can use to create more internal physiological friction in these systems, right? And not to mention, I'm going to do a quick veer off into social emotional learning. This is when we're teaching kids how to identify their emotions, when we're teaching kids how to build relationships with one another. Not only does it make their health outcomes better when they're young adults, right? They get sick less, they get sick for much less longer. It also improves the relationships and the children around them that creates that scaffolding, right? We are talking about building the proper scaffolding of protection that occurs. And not to mention that social emotional learning not only helps with these types of disorders, such as gambling, but a multitude of others, right? So it is, I just cannot talk more about teaching that in the school systems. We have other risk factors such as impulsivity. I'm getting back on the ramp here. We have the aggressive marketing, the incentives, VIP programs. Anyone that games, you've probably have signed up for a battle pass, right? These are addiction processes, right? It is meant to keep you within the system, within the platform, and to not give you an off-ramp, right? And it uses multiple tactics, and we have gotten good. We have gotten real good at keeping someone within a system, thanks to gaming in many ways.
100%.
Some of the protective factors, strong social support, financial guardrails, budgeting limits, delayed funds access, early identification, right? If we actually do provide more spaces that are easily accessible for when this starts to be a problem, of relieving that financial strain and providing support. Healthy coping skills and access to treatment, right? So actually, if we're doing good community mental health, problem gambling is also going to be affected with some of these other types of interventions that we're doing already. We can create specific spaces for it if we're seeing a large prevalence. But good mental health in itself is a protective factor against the harms of gambling. And also doing good community organizing work, establishing norms around gambling, having open conversations, reducing that stigma, because what we have seen is that that communities themselves are the targets, right? Because an individual's loss of funds is not substantial, but if it happens at scale and you're extracting that wealth at a systematic way, then it becomes profitable to do so. And so you have to buffer that at a community level. So I would not be surprised if it happens at a geographic space.
I would argue another protective factor that we don't have on here is poverty alleviation measures. Investing in our communities. One of the best ways to prevent gambling predation of hope is for me to be able to afford my food already, right? I don't need to bet on making $100 when I already have it in my pocket. And by stopping that initial step, because for those of us that work with individuals that are diagnosed with problem gambling, we realize after a while it's not about the money. But it was at one point. If we can stop it there, we can stop it anywhere.
All right, so there are tiered ways that we can address this in terms of public health actions. And we have walked through these layers, right? We can do some universal preventions, which happens at the policy level. We can do product protections, restrictions, regulations. We can also create more friction, require more friction on these platforms that reduce ad limits, that reduce incentives, that make it easier to escape certain platforms. Europe does a great job of regulating battle passes in the
Yes.
game, and so I think that would be an excellent tactic to use. The other piece is that as community mental health centers, we can do selective prevention, right? We can do targeted intervention in these spaces where we talk with young adults. We can do high exposure settings, right? This is going to be your PSAs type of work.
And by that targeting, what we're targeting is not, again, thinking back to that prevention paradox, we're targeting not those at high risk that are visible, but those that are at risk. Those are in the margins that are getting, again, obscured.
We can also do early interventions. And one of the most interesting things is since there is comorbidity with gambling diagnoses, you can do early interventions for anxiety, depression, which will have similar effects to gambling addictions. And so that we already have ends for providing prevention in these spaces. And if we need to get more targeted, if it is very specific to this individual, we can do SBIRT style interventions in this as well, because the mechanisms are the same as alcohol and drug use. We can apply an SBIRT style screening to catch problem gambling as well. And I do suspect that it will become more common, especially as our economy has a larger section of gambling.
Just a quick aside, how many in the audience know what SBIRT is? Couple? Okay. So SBIRT is an acronym. It's Screening, Brief Intervention, Referral, and Treatment. So it's meant as a short-term way of addressing issues by first screening where someone might have a problem or a concern, providing that brief, immediate intervention, and then referring them to continued treatment. And it is a very effective form of prevention and a very effective modality in therapy.
As we are approaching this clinical level, the traditional evidence-based practices should also be very effective and have shown to be effective. Cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, those are actually usually tied side by side with SBIRT screenings anyways. So those modalities should work very similarly. At an institutional level, normalize screening for these kinds of things. Allow clients to be able to assess for financial harms, establish safety, right? This comes into a kind of financial literacy space. We can do financial literacy and also acknowledge that sometimes we just don't earn enough. You can't squeeze more blood from a rock, right? So we can become literate and advocate for an increased minimum wage at the same time, right? Greater employment as well. Those things are not mutually exclusive. That happens sometimes in conversations in my space where someone will be very much against financial literacy courses. And I was like, yes, as long as it's also paired with policy and advocacy measures to increase the capacity. Because I agree that it is a both and situation. Also, warm handoffs for specialty care and peer supports, right? As we're building community health infrastructure, there are ways that we should be doing the warm handoffs in all the different specific ways, specific interventions that we're doing. One of the things is if relationships, emotional regulation is a protective factor, building that safety in that relationship can protect them as you move them and help them navigate your institution. Right. Partner with other community organizations to reduce the stigma. Targeting this at a community level, right? Using the institutional power within our communities, not just me with a billboard or a sign out saying, if you've gambled, it's okay, I can help, right? You know, it's a coordinated effort.
And speaking of those population safeguards, Dr. Clark astutely pointed out the current legislation to raise the minimum age for online betting to 21. That is great if it is paired with more things to protect that person. Age is just a number. It is so easy to get past that. When I'm online, I look like anybody. There has to be more. The conceit of responsible gaming and responsible gambling as the only prevention tool is ineffective when it's not supported by policies and structural systems to protect that person. And that leads us into our closing statements here. And I really, especially for those of you in epidemiology, this is a very big piece. If your metric of measure is too narrow, your response is too small. Problem gambling is a very useful term, but it is a poor metric to measure population level harms. Because that harm.
Yeah. So, because again, this goes back to choose your metaphor, right? Is it an iceberg? Mm-hmm. Is it the tree instead of the forests? Is it that we're looking through too small of a keyhole? Right? Any of those metaphors work perfectly fine because we want to get to both the breadth and the depth of the issue, right?
And that level of equity requires us to pay attention not just to the exposure of those at risk of being harmed, but the resources and barriers we as community partners and leaders within our community can bring to bear to protect those most vulnerable in our communities, to instill hope that is not predatory and optimism that is well placed and grounded in reality. And that kind of public health response, in order for it to be truly effective, cannot be responsible gambling alone. It has to combine product, policy protections with that screening, that early intervention, and that treatment.
Here are our receipts for academic rigor.
We did our homework.
And yes, I guess we can open up the floor for questions. I want to acknowledge this operated much like a survey of topics, but I hope that what you take away is that you can explore in depth any one of those pieces. This could probably be 5 different presentations if we wanted it to be, but they are all connected by a golden thread, right? That there is a golden thread of how this operates, and understanding the linkages is important. So I just wanted to thank you all and just open the floor.
Yes, sir.
Oh, hey.
You can just say there. It's all right, buddy.
First of all, I want to comment on the first 2 presentations of today. I think they're outstanding, and I think they definitely ought to come into the thinking about gambling. But the first thing I thought about as you developed your point is that you really made a major change in the definition of gambling.
Yes.
If we go back to the early presentations to this organization, there was one requirement for something to be gambling.
Yes.
And we argued about that at the National Gaming Impact Study Commission in the 70s and so on. But the irreducible minimum for gambling was that it be a random event.
Correct.
That the underlying probabilities came randomly. And that was the basis of Fisherian statistics, trying to predict agriculture production and other things like that. And it was a reality of the kind of things that were called gambling, like a horse racing. It had to be based on a random event. Now, what you're talking about is very much broadening the idea of gambling.
Correct.
And that is that gambling is any process that people wager on. And that's a very big difference, because in the first instance, we were very concerned about what's going on in the brain of the individual. And we tried to predict that, and eventually it brought us to the midbrain. It brought us to something that we published on, and that is addictions without substance. That it didn't require a chemical for it to be gambling. That it could be something else. But now what you're saying is that you're looking at the behavior of the human being, and we know from the research that human beings are almost ignorant about how to generate a random process.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about betting on something that Musk would do, or trying to predict the
Yes.
behavior of a softball player versus a baseball player and so on, in that instance, we're talking about something that is not random, but is very difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And the contribution of AI is that it has a much greater ability to process data than the human being has.
Mm-hmm.
There was an article back when I was in graduate school, and that's a day or two ago, that we human beings operate on the magic number 7 plus or minus 2.
Yes.
And that has been throughout history
Mm-hmm.
and now. And we're changing the idea of gambling to anything that somebody wagers on.
Yes.
And
So,
not that they're trying to predict a random event.
correct.
Now, pathology was defined
Mm-hmm.
as believing that you can predict a random event.
Yes.
And pathological, in a clinician's view, is a person who has a belief, for example, that you can predict a random event because God is talking to you,
Mm-hmm.
or because a particular rose occurs in a particular plot.
Sure.
And the key to it is irrationality.
Yes. And I would agree to that. So what Dr. Barrett is pointing out very astutely is that is the necessity for us to change our definitions from what was the common understand vernacular. What we used to look at as a diagnosable issue was very narrow. Again, if our metric is too narrow and we're focusing on the one, we're ignoring everyone around you. And this is by and large what we're seeing across mental health by not focusing on individual diagnoses, but looking at things on a spectrum and looking at them as who all is being impacted. Yes, prediction markets are transitioning how we understand betting from betting on uncertain events to where we're betting on events based on human behavior. But it's not terribly different, but that is also the dodge that people are making by calling it investing and marketing, or rather than betting or wagering, right? And it's that same argument. So it is vital for us to understand and transition beyond what we learned when we were in school or what we've developed and what we believed, because technology is not going to stop for you. It's not going to stop because this is the information we had when we were in school or when we were professionals, because it's going to keep growing. Dr. Barrett, did you have a cell phone when you were in school?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, it was just yesterday. That's the point, though, right? Things don't stop for us. Yes, ma'am.
Has the idea of like cryptocurrency and Bitcoin come up in your research?
Absolutely.
I see, the theory of economics is everything positive has a negative return, and I'm seeing where that it feels like that the whole scheme was built to plunge the novice, and I watched a lot of people during COVID buying into Bitcoin, and now
Sure.
there's literal machines in liquor stores and gas stations where that you can go and buy Bitcoin. And I'm a substance use provider, and I find that in working with some groups of people that actually the behaviors around gambling in so many facets is actually the real conversations that we need to be having.
Correct.
Because I live in Eastern Kentucky. I'm from Corbin.
Okay, we're neighbors.
Recently, the FBI came in and finally made the, as they call them, the gray machines.
Correct.
To be removed, which was interesting for me to learn by firsthand knowledge that those people that no longer had a place to go for these gray machines,
They went online.
guess where that they went?
Yeah, they went to the gas station where they could get Bitcoin.
No, they went to, so, animal fighting has resurged where that in eastern Kentucky, this is what they're reporting to me, and they're organizing, and it's becoming much bigger again because it's something that they can control.
Correct.
And that no longer, have to worry about those machines. There's so much cultural aspects about this that affect the behavior, and I just want to make one more point is that, I work with a population that's a lot of reentry, is that I'm working with people that are coming out of incarceration,
Still got bills to pay.
and they, gambling is a huge part of incarceration that they're bringing with them because they're this is what I'm hearing is that the obstacles and that getting resources to just stabilize is become a moving target. So criminal activity related to gambling is a way to survive.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different points. Is it Renee?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a lot of different points that Renee brought up here, and we're going to go ahead and address them one by one, and then we'll be at about 11:45. We'll be more than happy to continue taking questions as well, particularly for those of you online as well. Hey, guys. So first part, criminality is a social construct, right? What is criminal is designed and defined by those in power against those that are not. In many cases, there are some things that are very clearly against a moral fabric or a criminal fabric because they betray the need for the communities by and large, right? Theft, very obviously a crime. But it can also become a moral component because for those in our society, while you're in prison, that prison ain't free. You get out, you have bills you have to pay. And now you have this stigma of ex-con on you as well. You still have to figure out ways to get these things paid. So you have to diverge into what would be considered criminal behavior by necessity because those bills don't disappear, right? That erodes that community harm, but it also creates that secondary community market for funding. This is where cryptocurrency comes in because I can trace a dollar bill, right? I can trace those transactions and everything like that. Cryptocurrency, by and large, and we're going to term as cryptocurrency, Bitcoin is just one version of cryptocurrency across the many, right? Cryptocurrency isn't something that's easily tracked. It goes onto a blockchain, and each one can be traced to a different system, but by and large, it's anonymous. So it's very easy for me to easily transition this to you to this. And then I turn around and transition that into financial values. It's just a newer version of money laundering. That's the easiest way to explain it because any further, my head actually starts to hurt too. But what we see, and again, when we create marginalized groups based on social responses and structural inequality, those groups don't stop having basic needs that need to be met. So if I put up a hurdle, and we talked about this earlier, if my legs are broken, I'm just going to have to walk around it, right? For individuals that are coming out of incarceration, they have broken legs because our systems put them there. And then we put hurdles and expect you to jump over it. No, I'm going to walk around. I have to still make sure my ends are met. Did that kind of address that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But yeah, no, you're 100% right. Any other questions? Anyone online? You want to just tell us we did a great job? That's fine too. We're going to break for lunch, but you guys can have to have whatever's in your kitchen. All right. So we have our contact information here. I'd be more than happy to talk shop with you. Dr. Miller, I'm going to volunteer him as well for that. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.